Hey everyone, it's Jamie Batch, your instructor for AMP2. We are starting our lecture series on the digestive system, which right now is chapter 22. If you are a current HCC student, we're going to switch here, doing screen share. This PowerPoint is very long, and believe it or not, we go through all of it. So a lot of students tend to think the digestive system unit is easy because it is stuff that you're familiar with. We all know a little bit about the stomach, right? We all eat, right? So we feel like we know it until you get into this chapter and you realize, whoa, there's a lot to this. So the anatomy stuff I'm going to try to go quickly through because we cover that pretty well in lab, and I'm going to try to stick mostly to the physiology piece in this lecture. So overall review of the digestive system, this is how all of the nutrients get into the body. This is also how waste products, one of the ways that waste products leaves the body. It works with all of our other systems that are inside of the body, supporting and protecting and doing their job, providing nutrients to those systems so that they can do their job. Things like the cardiovascular system, the respiratory system, the urinary system, all work in conjunction with the digestive system. So you can see that here on this little image. The carbon dioxide and oxygen goes into the blood. The nutrients from the digestive system goes into the blood. All of the gases from the respiratory, nutrients from the digestive, all go into the tissue cells. Tissue cells produce waste. Waste are eliminated through either the urinary or digestive system. So, as well as the respiratory system, I should say, carbon dioxide, right? So let's talk about the components of our digestive system. It's made of the digestive tract or the GI tract or the alimentary canal, same thing. Typically, we'll just call it the GI tract. This is the food tube, right? Passing all the way from start to end, from mouth to anus, all the way through. There's also accessory structures that are secreting into the digestive tract. Food does not pass through them. They are just secreting into. So here you can see the breakdown, the difference between a major organ of the digestive tract and an accessory organ. Major organs where food passes through: mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, anus. The accessories to our digestive system include the teeth, the tongue, the salivary glands, all three pairs, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. We're going to keep moving on, talking about the nitty-gritty structure of our digestive tract. It is a long muscular tube, and it is lined with ridges and folds. Those ridges and folds help increase the surface area. They allow for the expansion of that tube when food is present. So there are four major layers. Think of our blood vessels. We had the tunica intima, media, externa, right? These three layers. You're going to see something similar here in the digestive tract, except we have four layers. We have an inner lining called a mucosa. You've probably heard this word before. We talk about mucous membranes, right? All of these openings to the outside of the body, the rectum, the mouth, right? Mucus, the mucosa or mucus lining is moistened by glandular secretions. It has a areolar connective tissue as its lamina propria. This is the inner lining of our entire digestive tract. So it's the same all the way through, right? The actual epithelium changes, right? We know it's stratified squamous in the mouth, and there are some tissue changes as we go through the stomach, small and large intestines, but there are glands along the way for lubrication, so to speak. Deep to that layer is a submucosa. This submucosa has all of the vessels, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels. There's also exocrine glands in certain regions, secreting buffers and enzymes and things like that. This is a thicker layer of dense connective tissue, dense irregular connective tissue in the submucosa, holding all of the vessels in place on the mucosa. Deep to that, we have what's called the muscularis externa. This is a double layer of smooth muscle. Typically, there's an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer. And this is for that mixing and churning, as well as that peristalsis, that kind of forward momentum that our food undergoes. So the muscularis externa is the muscular layer that is deep to the submucosa. And then finally, the serosa. So the serosa is just the outer lining. If we were to cut you open and look at your stomach or look at your small intestine, this is what we would see. So this is, and it is the same as the visceral peritoneum. So remember, the epicardium and the visceral pericardium were the same thing. You have the same thing here. Your serosa and the visceral peritoneum are the same thing, right? This is that outer covering along the digestive tract all the way through the abdominal cavity. There's no serosal membrane in the oral cavity, in the throat. The esophagus doesn't even have a serosal lining. It's just a muscular tube. So when you look at the esophagus on the models in class, or if you were to do a dissection, you would literally see muscle when you look at the esophagus, as opposed to the stomach, small and large intestine, you would see that serosal lining. So the collagen fibers form a layer called the adventitia, which are within the other cavities, the esophagus and rectum. It's just attaching those muscles from the muscularis externa to the other structures, holding everything in place. There's also the mesentery. Mesentery is formed by a double layer. It's kind of like an invagination of the peritoneal membrane. It kind of folds in. It's made of a areolar connective tissue, and this is basically a net, if you will. It kind of acts like a spider web net to hold all the organs in place, and it also prevents the intestines from getting tangled up and twisted on each other. If you ever watch medical dramas like the old ER or Grey's Anatomy, House, sometimes when they're doing abdominal surgery, you'll see them, or The Walking Dead does this a lot too. When you see them pull out the intestines, especially in The Walking Dead, it literally just looks like sausage links. That's pretty ridiculous. But in the medical dramas, you'll see that it looks like a tube. And that is where you know that they're not paying attention to the details, because all of our intestines, all of our abdominal organs are held in place by this thick spiderweb network of mesentery, which is connecting each tube to each other. So as you know, that sneaky like small intestine is going every which way. If you were to actually pull it out, you would see that there is this connective tissue linking it all together. That's the mesentery. And so it's rooting the organs to the abdominal wall, rooting the organs to each other, and not allowing for them to twist and tangle into each other, because they're not contained in a bony cavity. They're just held there by these tissues. So here's a bisection of a typical part of the digestive tract. I would say this is probably the small intestine by the way this looks. You can see the mesentery, which is that connective tissue on the superior side of this, and then as we go through, you see there's the serosa, the muscularis externa with the two muscular layers, the submucosa, which is where all the blood vessels and lymphatics are, and then the mucosal lining itself, which in this case is lined with villi and microvilli, which is why I guess this was the small intestine. You'll see that as we move through those different layers. So let's talk about the components of the mucosa. First, you have a mucosal epithelium. Just like on our respiratory tract, we had different tissues, different epithelial types. As we transition through, you're going to see the same thing here. So it starts and ends with stratified squamous. So the oral cavity, the pharynx, the rectum all have stratified squamous. That's for friction, right? Stomach, small, large intestine all have simple columnar, one cell layer thick of columnar. There are villi within the small intestine. These are little mucosal projections to increase the surface area. These are, if we go back here, what you see, these extra little, kind of like little fingers sticking up, villi. There's also something called the lamina propria. This is the areolar connective tissue where all of the blood vessels are. This is with kind of the boundary between the mucosa and the submucosa. So the muscularis mucosa is a muscular layer within the mucosa itself. It's actually two very small concentric layers of smooth muscle. And this is to alter the shape of the lumen. So the muscularis externa, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, that muscularis externa, where you have your circular and longitudinal layers, you know, in that big outer layer underneath of the submucosa. In the muscularis mucosa, you have another very, very thin layer of muscle, and this is going to help constrict and dilate that lumen of the, you know, digestive tract, whether this is the small or large intestine. There's also circular folds. These are within the small intestine. It's called the plicae circularis. These folds allow for expansion of the space, increased surface area for absorption. So the nerve plexuses involved, they are going to control our digestive activities, right? There is parasympathetic and sympathetic input. The parasympathetic is going to increase the digestive activity. It's going to increase the muscle tone of our digestive tract, get that movement going, get our lumen, you know, dilated, allowing for that food to come through. Also activate all of the glands, right? All of our exocrine glands, the salivary glands, the pancreatic juices, the stomach juices, get all of those flowing, so to speak. Sympathetic stimulation is going to do the opposite. It's going to turn those glands off, and it's going to decrease muscle tone. The submucosal plexus is located within the submucosal layer. This is innervating both the mucosa and the submucosa with sensory neurons and autonomic nerve fibers. So this is how we get our input as to whether or not we're full, things like that. The myenteric plexus is a network of sensory neurons and autonomic nerve fibers. So these are located within that muscularis externa, and it works in conjunction with the submucosal plexus to coordinate all of that localized control of the digestive activity. So in other words, as you know, the food is moving from the stomach to the small intestine, shutting off the digestive juices in the stomach and turning on the digestive juices in the small intestine. So it's looking at the big picture and regulating everything. That's what the myenteric plexus does. So here you see, again, a nice cross-section of this again would be the small intestine. You can see the plicae circularis, which is this extra fold. Notice at the larger image that it is legit like a circle that goes around the entire lumen. Then you have the villi, which are the finger-like projections. You have the mucosa with those villi, the submucosa, which is where all of these vessels are, including our submucosal plexus within that submucosa. Then we have our muscularis externa, which is where the myenteric plexus is for overall regulation and feedback. You can, you know what, I think I'm actually going to stop this video here so that you have time to digest, haha, pun intended, this material before we move on to the next section talking about smooth muscle in the digestive tract. See ya.